All right, welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we've got a really interesting pile of stuff to unpack, and it's all about something that can be, well, a bit of a head-scratcher when you're learning English, especially for you.
Yeah.
Those tricky words and phrases.
Absolutely.
The ones that seem to have a mind of their own, like little language loopholes.
That's a great way to put it, those loopholes. And for someone like you who's grappling with all the ins and outs of English, we figured it'd be super helpful to really dig into why these quirks exist and how to kind of make sense of them.
Exactly, because let's be honest, sometimes English feels less like a straight path and more like, one of those winding mazes where you're bound to bump into a wall or two.
Really can, yeah.
But here's the really cool part, and I think this is what we want to emphasize for you today. Getting a handle on these loopholes, these little tricky bits, it's not just about, avoiding mistakes. It's actually a lot of fun once you start to see the patterns, and it can really boost your confidence as you get more comfortable with the language.
Definitely.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To untangle these linguistic knots, to make them feel less intimidating.
Right.
And to show you that English can be playful, even when it's being a bit mischievous.
Exactly. And I think a perfect place to start is with something that I always find kind of delightful, and I think you will too. And that's this idea that one word can wear so many different hats, have all these different meanings. Linguists, those language experts, they've got fancy terms for this. Homophones, homonyms, homographs.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it just means that a single word is doing a lot of different jobs. Think about the word set, for instance.
Oh, set. That's a great one. I mean, you could be setting the table for dinner, you could be winning a set in tennis, or you could even be adjusting the settings on your phone, right? Same word, completely different meanings depending on the situation.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so interesting for you as a learner. Your brain has to constantly work to figure out which set we're talking about based on the other words around it.
It's almost like the language is playing a game with you, isn't it? Like, can you figure out what I mean this time?
It is a bit of a game, and it highlights how much English relies on context to make sense. Take the word read, for example. Present tense, it sounds like read, but past tense, it's read, just a tiny sound shift.
Right.
But it makes a huge difference. Imagine saying, yesterday I read a book that made me red. It sounds like you're saying the book, physically changed your skin color.
It does, yeah, like you're blushing or something.
Exactly. That's why paying attention to those little signals, those tiny changes in pronunciation, the words that come before and after, it's all crucial.
It is.
And then, you've got words like lead, where you can lead a group, pronounced lead, or talk about the metal lead, pronounced lead.
Right.
It's all about those subtle audio cues, and sometimes even visual cues if you're reading, to help you decipher the meaning.
And it really forces you to pay attention, doesn't it? You can't just tune out for a second, or you'll miss those crucial bits of information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the language is asking you to be present, to really engage with it.
Another one that always gets me is bass. The fish and the musical instrument.
Oh, yeah.
Two totally different pronunciations. Do you really have to listen to the context to know which one is being talked about, right?
And that raises a great question for you. How do you actually tell these words apart when you hear them spoken?
Good question.
Because in real life, you're not always going to have the luxury of seeing the word written down, right?
No.
So how do you do it?
I mean, I guess you just learn to listen for those contextual clues, the other words in the sentence, the topic of the conversation.
Exactly. Is someone talking about what they caught while fishing? Or are they describing their favorite band? Those little hints are everywhere. You just got to train your ear to pick up on them.
And it becomes more natural over time, right?
Yeah.
The more you listen to English being spoken, the more you start to develop this intuition for how words are used and how context shapes their meaning.
Absolutely. It's like learning to read a map. At first, all those lines and symbols can be overwhelming.
Right.
But the more you use it, the more familiar it becomes, and eventually, you can navigate almost effortlessly.
And let's not forget wind. You've got the wind blowing through the trees, pronounced one way, and then winding a clock, pronounced another way.
Right, wind and wind. Another classic example of how English likes to play with sounds.
It does. And what's interesting? Even native English speakers sometimes get tripped up by these words. I mean, I've definitely had moments where I've had to stop and think, okay, wait, which wind are we talking about here?
It happens to all of us, and I think that's kind of comforting,
It is.
It shows that even for people who've been speaking English their whole lives, these little quirks can still be a bit of a puzzle.
Exactly. So don't be too hard on yourself if you get them mixed up sometimes. It's
Yeah.
all part of the process.
So we've seen how one word can have many different faces, right? It can morph and change depending on the company it keeps.
It's like a linguistic chameleon.
It really is. Now let's move on to something even more colorful. And I think this is where English really starts to show its personality. Idioms.
Oh, yeah. Idioms. This is where things can get really interesting and sometimes a little bit wacky.
This is where the literal meaning of the words is often completely different from the message that's actually being conveyed. And I think this can be especially tricky for you as a learner because you might be tempted to translate each word individually and end up with something that makes absolutely no sense.
Oh, absolutely. You can't take them at face value, right? Like, it's raining cats and dogs.
Yeah.
If you pictured that literally, you'd have a pretty strange scene in your head.
You would. Animals falling from the sky. It'd be quite a sight. But of course, as you know, it just means it's raining really heavily.
Right.
And that's the beauty of idioms. They add this layer of imagery and color to the language, but you have to learn to decipher the code, to understand the meaning behind the words.
And a lot of times, those meanings are rooted in history and culture, right?
Absolutely. They often start as metaphors or analogies that become so commonly used that their original literal meaning fades away. Like break a leg, which is something you might say to someone before a performance.
Oh, yeah. And if you didn't know the meaning, you'd probably be horrified. Why would you wish someone an injury?
Exactly. But it's actually a theatrical superstition that means good luck. There are different theories about where it comes from, but one suggestion is that it relates to the curtains on a stage, which were traditionally called legs.
Oh, interesting.
So if the performance was so good that the audience demanded an encore, the actors would have to come back out,
Right.
causing the curtain legs to be drawn back or broken multiple times.
So break a leg is like wishing for a hugely successful performance.
Exactly. It's a wish for repeated bows and a wildly appreciative audience.
I love how there's often a story behind these phrases. It makes them more memorable.
It does. It gives them a depth and a richness that goes beyond just their literal meaning.
What about spill the beans?
Ah, yes, to reveal a secret. It creates this vivid image of someone clumsily knocking over a container of beans. But like many idioms, the origin is a bit murky. Some theories suggest it might come from ancient voting practices where beans were used as ballots.
Oh, so spilling the beans would be like revealing the election results before they were officially announced.
Exactly. It's about letting a secret out prematurely.
See, there's always more to these idioms than meets the eye.
There is. They're like little windows into the past, little nuggets of history and culture embedded in the language.
It makes you realize that learning English isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about absorbing a whole way of thinking, a whole cultural perspective.
It really is. And I think that's what makes it so rewarding. You know, it's not just a language. It's a key to understanding a whole world of culture and history.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about words with multiple meanings, and we've delved into the world of idioms. Now, are you ready for some real wordplay?
Always up for a challenge.
Because we're going to talk about puns. Those groan-worthy, but sometimes brilliant uses of language.
Oh, puns, the dad jokes of the language world.
Exactly. They rely on words sounding alike but having completely different meanings.
Yeah.
And it's that sudden realization, that aha moment, that makes them either funny or just plain terrible.
And it's that aha moment that can be really beneficial for you as a learner because it forces you to think about the different ways a word can be used, the different nuances of meaning.
Right.
Like, for example, I used to be a baker, but I couldn't make enough dough.
Ah, a classic.
Dough as in money and dough as in what you use to bake bread.
It's that double meaning that makes you chuckle or groan, depending on your sense of humor.
And then there are tongue twisters, which are less about meaning and more about sound.
Oh, yes, those tongue-tangling challenges designed to make you trip over your words.
Exactly. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. I dare you to say that 5 times fast.
That one's a classic for a reason. It highlights how tricky those repeated consonant sounds can be for English learners. But actually, even though they're a bit silly, tongue twisters can be quite helpful for practicing pronunciation and getting a feel for the rhythm and flow of the language.
Definitely. They force you to pay attention to the individual sounds, to articulate clearly, and to maintain a certain pace and rhythm.
Right, right. And I think Being able to craft a good pun, it actually shows a pretty sophisticated understanding of the language.
It does.
It's not just about knowing the dictionary definition of a word, but also about recognizing those subtle connections between words, those shades of meaning that can be used to create a humorous effect.
Precisely. And it often requires an understanding of shared cultural knowledge as well.
All right, you have to get the context, the references, the way words are used in different situations.
Like, for example, why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so we've got puns, we've got tongue twisters, and then there's this whole other layer of wordplay, the more subtle art of double entendre.
Double entendres, where a phrase can have two meanings, one innocent and one, well, a bit more suggestive.
And often it's the context and the tone of voice that tell you which meaning is intended.
Exactly. It's a way of playing with language, of hinting at something without saying it directly.
It adds a layer of complexity, a bit of mystery, which can be fun or maybe a little bit awkward depending on the situation.
Absolutely. So all these different forms of wordplay, they really give you a deeper look into the more playful and less literal side of English.
It's about going beyond the surface level, beyond just the basic meaning of the words.
And that's where the real richness of the language lies, I think. It's in those layers of meaning, those subtle connections, those unexpected twists and turns.
All right, now let's move on to something that could be a real trap for language learners, especially for you coming from a different linguistic background.
Oh, you mean those sneaky false friends, right?
Exactly, false friends. Those words that look or sound very similar to words in your native language, but actually have completely different meanings in English.
They can be so deceptive.
They can, and they can lead to some very awkward and sometimes hilarious misunderstandings.
Absolutely. They lull you into a false sense of security, like you think you know what a word means, but then you use it and get blank stares, or even worse, confused laughter.
Take the word actual, for instance.
Or yeah, actual. In English, it means real or genuine, but in some other languages, a very similar word means current or present.
Right, and that can make a big difference.
It can. Imagine saying to someone, he's an actual expert, and they think you mean he's only an expert right now, not in the past or the future.
Or sensible in English, meaning someone with good judgment,
Right.
practical.
Right?
But in some other languages, the similar sounding word means sensitive, referring to someone's emotional nature.
So you could end up complimenting someone's practicality when you meant to say they're easily moved by things.
Exactly. And then there's eventually, which in English means in the end or after a long time. But some learners might assume it means immediately or soon because of a similar sounding word in their native language.
And that can lead to all sorts of scheduling conflicts and confused expectations.
It really highlights the fact that you can't always rely on direct translations.
You can't. Language is more than just a collection of words. It's a reflection of culture, history, and a unique way of seeing the world.
And these false friends, they often pop up because languages share common historical roots.
Right.
But over time, as languages evolve and drift apart, the meanings of those shared words can shift in unexpected ways.
It's like two branches growing from the same tree trunk. They start together, but eventually they reach out in different directions, shaped by the environment around them.
That's a great analogy. So
Yeah.
for you, the key is to be aware of these potential traps.
Absolutely.
To recognize that just because a word looks or sounds familiar doesn't mean it carries the same meaning in English.
It's about developing that sensitivity to the nuances of language, to those subtle differences that can make all the difference in meaning.
Now, let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture for a moment. Why do some of these language loopholes exist in the first place?
That's a great question.
I mean, why does English have to be so tricky sometimes?
Well, one answer lies in the way language evolves over time. Words change, new words emerge, old words fade away, and it's all driven by the way people use language, by cultural shifts, by historical events.
Think about the word nice, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Today it means pleasant or agreeable, but centuries ago it actually meant foolish or even stupid.
It's incredible how the meaning of a word can completely flip over time.
It is, and it shows that language isn't static. It's constantly adapting to reflect the way we think and the world around us.
And sometimes those changes can be quite dramatic, like the word literally, which traditionally meant actually true, not figurative.
Oh, right.
But these days, you hear people using it all the time for emphasis, even when what they're saying is clearly not literal.
It's become one of those linguistic battlegrounds.
It has. Some people insist on the traditional meaning, while others embrace the more modern, emphatic usage.
And this tension between how a word should be used and how it's actually used is a big part of how language changes and evolves.
It is. It's that push and pull, that constant negotiation between tradition and innovation that keeps language alive and vibrant.
And of course, technology has a huge impact on language as well.
Absolutely. New inventions, new concepts, they demand new words, and often we end up taking existing words and giving them new meanings to fit those new realities.
Like the word cloud. For centuries, it only referred to those fluffy white things in the sky.
Right.
But now it's also used to describe digital data storage.
It's a perfect example of how language adapts to the changing world.
So all these language loopholes, they're not just random quirks designed to make English harder for you to learn.
No.
They're often a reflection of a long and fascinating history of the language, the way it's been shaped by culture, technology, and the ever-evolving ways in which people use it.
Exactly. They're like little fossils, little traces of the past embedded in the language we speak today.
And for you as a learner, understanding that evolution can make those tricky bits of English feel less intimidating and more like clues to a fascinating puzzle.
It can, and it can make the learning process so much more engaging. It's not just about memorizing words and rules. It's about uncovering stories, about understanding the people and the events that have shaped the language.
So keep that in mind as you continue your journey. Keep exploring those linguistic rabbit holes and see where they lead you.
Now, how about we take a little break from all this theoretical stuff and have some fun with language?
Sounds good to me.
Let's play a little game we like to call Loophole Challenge. Guess that meaning.
All right, are you ready to test your skills?
Bring it on.
Okay, so we're going to give you a word and then use it in 2 different sentences.
Right.
And your challenge is to figure out the different meanings based on the context of each sentence.
It's like being a linguistic detective.
It is. It is. Okay, first word, bank. Listen carefully. I need to go to the bank to deposit a check. We love to sit on the bank of the river and watch the ducks. So in the first sentence, what kind of bank are we talking about?
Well, in that case, bank obviously refers to a financial institution, a place where you keep your money.
Exactly. And in the second sentence, we love to sit on the bank of the river.
Ah, there. Bank means the sloping land along the edge of a river or lake. Same word, completely different image conjured up in your mind.
Right. It's all about that context, that surrounding information that tells you how to interpret the word.
Now it's your turn. Think of other words in English that have multiple meanings, like bank, and see if you can come up with sentences that illustrate those different meanings.
It's a great way to test your understanding and to start seeing how context shapes meaning in English.
And if you stumble across any particularly tricky words, we'd love for you to share them with us on social media using the hashtag #LanguageLoopholes. We're always curious to see what you're discovering and what challenges you're facing.
And who knows, maybe we'll feature your word in a future deep dive.
All right, so we've explored some of the trickier aspects of English. Now let's give you some practical strategies to help you master them.
Yeah, because it's one thing to understand these loopholes. It's another thing to actually be able to use the language confidently and accurately.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, and we can't emphasize this enough, context is king. Don't just try to memorize words in isolation. Pay attention to how they're used in real-life situations, in conversations, in books, in movies. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more you'll start to develop that intuitive understanding of how words work in different contexts.
Right. It's about seeing those words in action, not just as isolated entries in a dictionary.
Exactly. Now here's a fun tip. Practice with games. Make learning enjoyable by incorporating word games and puzzles into your routine. Crosswords, Scrabble, even those language learning apps that focus on things like idioms or homophones, they can all help solidify your understanding in a fun and engaging way.
I love that. It takes the pressure off and makes learning feel less like work and more like play.
Absolutely. And another thing you can try is keeping a language journal. Whenever you come across a new word or phrase that seems tricky, write it down, but don't just write the word. Write it in a sentence, maybe even a couple of different sentences, to show how its meaning can change depending on the context.
Right, so you're not just memorizing the word, you're creating a little story around it, which can make it much more memorable.
Exactly. And finally, watch and listen actively. Surround yourself with English language media, movies, TV shows, podcasts, music, whatever interests you. But don't just have it on in the background. Really pay attention to how native speakers use language, how they pronounce words, how they construct sentences, how their tone of voice and body language contribute to the meaning.
It's about immersing yourself in the sounds and the rhythms of the language, not just the words themselves.
And here's a bonus tip. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, never be shy about asking for clarification.
If you're unsure about the meaning of a word or phrase, just ask a teacher, a friend, a native speaker.
Most people are happy to help, and it shows that you're actively engaged in learning.
Absolutely. You could even try rewriting famous quotes or song lyrics by deliberately substituting words with different meanings. It's a fun way to play with language and to really see how versatile English vocabulary can be.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And lastly, try to expose yourself to different dialects and accents of English. The way people speak in London is different from how people speak in New York or Sydney, and those variations can include differences in vocabulary, pronunciation, even grammar sometimes.
It's all part of the richness and diversity of the language.
It is. So embrace those differences, explore them, and remember that even native English speakers sometimes get tripped up by these tricky aspects of the language.
It's okay to make mistakes. It's part of the learning process.
And sometimes those mistakes can be the most memorable learning experiences. So don't be afraid to laugh at yourself, to embrace the absurdity of it all, and to keep experimenting with language.
All right, before we wrap things up, how about we share a couple of quick personal stories about times we've encountered our own language learning mishaps?
Oh, I'm always up for a good embarrassing language story.
Because I think it's important to remember that everyone makes mistakes, and those mistakes can actually be really valuable learning opportunities.
They can. I remember early on when I was learning another language, I completely misunderstood a common phrase after a meal.
Oh, no.
I thought "I'm full" meant I'm finished eating, rather than "I've had enough, I'm stuffed." Let's just say there were some awkward moments when I politely declined more food, even though I was still quite hungry.
Oh, I've totally been there.
It was a good reminder that sometimes even seemingly simple phrases can have cultural nuances that you might not be aware of.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I heard the idiom kick the bucket. I literally pictured someone kicking a bucket, and I was so confused.
It's not the most intuitive phrase, is it?
And not at all. It wasn't until someone explained that it meant to die that I had that aha moment.
And I bet you never forgot the meaning after that.
Nope, definitely not.
Oh.
It's those moments of confusion, those moments where you realize you've completely misunderstood something that often lead to the most lasting learning.
They do. And another one for me was beat around the bush. I honestly thought it was some kind of gardening technique.
Really?
I even tried to use it in a conversation to explain why I hadn't gotten to the main point of my story yet, and the looks I got were priceless.
I can only imagine.
It taught me that context is everything, and sometimes you just have to ask for clarification, no matter how silly you think your question might be.
So to you, our listener, don't be afraid to laugh at yourself, to embrace those awkward moments, and to know that everyone who's ever learned a language has been there.
Absolutely. Now, to shift gears a bit, let's talk about the cultural roots of some of these tricky words and phrases. It's fascinating to delve into their origins because it gives you a richer understanding of why they exist and what they really mean.
Yeah, a lot of these idioms and sayings have really interesting backstories.
They do. Take bite the bullet, for instance. It comes from a time when soldiers undergoing surgery without anesthesia would literally bite down on a bullet to help cope with the pain.
Wow, that puts a whole new spin on the phrase.
It does, doesn't it? And the straw that broke the camel's back? Such a vivid image to illustrate the idea that even a small addition can lead to a collapse if the burden is already too great.
It's a universal concept, that idea of reaching a breaking point.
It is.
Yeah.
And burning the midnight oil, which might sound a bit quaint in our modern age of electric lights, but it harkens back to a time when people literally used oil lamps to work late into the night.
These idioms are like little time capsules, little glimpses into the past.
They are, and they remind us that language is constantly evolving, shaped by the people who use it, the events that happen, the technology that's available.
And for you, exploring those cultural roots can make those tricky phrases feel less like obstacles and more like windows into a different time and a different way of life.
Exactly. It's like adding another dimension to your understanding of the language, a depth and richness that goes beyond just the words themselves.
All right, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly recap some of the key takeaways.
We started by looking at words with multiple meanings, emphasizing how important context is in determining the intended meaning.
Right, we talked about idioms, those colorful phrases that often defy literal interpretation.
We explored the world of puns and wordplay, and we navigated the treacherous terrain of false friends and tricky translations.
And we touched on the fascinating topic of language evolution, seeing how words change over time and how culture shapes the way we use language.
And through it all, we've encouraged you to embrace the challenge, to laugh at the mistakes, and to enjoy the process of discovery.
Because ultimately, learning a language is about more than just memorizing words and rules. It's about connecting with a culture, understanding a different way of seeing the world, and expressing yourself in new and exciting ways.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep experimenting with language, and most importantly, have fun with it.
And if you encounter any particularly tricky words or phrases along the way, share them with us on social media using the hashtag language loopholes.
We love hearing from you and seeing what linguistic puzzles you're unraveling.
All right, before we say goodbye, we have one final challenge for you, just for fun.
A classic English tongue twister to give those speech muscles a workout.
Ready? Here it is. She sells seashells by the seashore. Try saying that 3 times fast.
We dare you.
And if you're feeling brave, record yourself trying to say it and share it with us on social media. We might just feature some of our favorites in a future episode.
Remember, every stumble, every mispronunciation is just a sign that you're actively engaging with the language. Embrace those moments, laugh at yourself, and keep practicing.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive,
We hope you enjoyed it.
and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now, and happy learning.